Your external environment is turning on different circuits in your brain, causing you to consciously or unconsciously think equal to everything that you know. And as long as you react and think equal to everything you know, you keep creating more of the same life. The principle in neuroscience says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. So if you keep thinking the same thoughts, if you keep performing the same actions, if you keep living by the same emotions, over time the redundancy of that begins to hardwire the brain into very specific patterns. And that pattern then becomes our identity or our personality. So most people at a certain point in their life, they keep thinking the same way. They hardwire their brain into a certain pattern. They keep doing the same things that create habits that become part of their identity. And they keep living by the same emotions that are created from the same experiences. And the redundancy and repetition of that begins to cause the brain to fire in very finite networks. And that becomes what we call our identity. So then by the time we're 35 years old, psychology says that for the most part, we're a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions that make up who we are as an identity. So when it comes time to change, and people have to realize that 5% of their conscious mind is working against 95% of what they've memorized subconsciously.
Wow.
So it's kind of like mind and body working in opposition. So that becomes very difficult to change because we're using a very small percentage to go against what we've subconsciously memorized. And neuroplasticity says that you're in fact changed biologically by every thought you think, every new thing you learn, every new experience that you create, every new choice that you make, every new dream that you dream. Your brain begins to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. And whenever you make the brain work differently, you're changing your mind, because mind is the brain in action. So most people then, at a certain point in their life, they stop learning and they start feeling. And when feelings become the barometer for change, we'll always talk ourselves out of greatness, because when you change, it means that you're going to have to come out of your resting state, number one, and number two, you're going to have to feel a little uncomfortable. Well, most people go, oh, I want to return back to that familiar identity. So here's how it works physiologically. If you have a thought, every time you have a thought, you make a chemical in your brain. If you have a great thought or an unlimited thought, you turn on a set of circuits in your brain in a very specific sequence and pattern that produces a level of mind that signals another part of your brain for you to begin to feel exactly the way you were just thinking, great or unlimited. If you have a negative thought or an unhappy thought, you turn on a different set of neural networks and a different combination and sequence that produces a different level of mind, that turns on a different blend of chemicals for you to feel exactly the way you were just thinking, negative or unhappy. Now, the moment you begin to feel the way you think, because the brain is in constant communication with you, begin to think the way you feel. So you begin to feel the way you think and think the way you feel and feel the way you think. And the cycle of thinking and feeling over time conditions the body to memorize that emotion better than the conscious mind. Whenever the body knows better than the mind, that's called a habit. Habit is when the body is the mind. State of being. Because when mind and body are working together, that's called a state of being. Now, thoughts are the language of the
Coherence.
brain, and feelings are the language of the body. So when you begin to think and feel in a certain cycle, you create a state of being. Now, as I said, 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors in which it's subconsciously running behind the scenes of our awareness. Here's a great example. You can't consciously remember a phone number. Well, you'd have to be over 35 for this, but you can't consciously remember a phone number, but you walk over to the receiver and you pick it up and you look at the dial pad and your fingers dial the number. You can't remember your ATM number, but your fingers can remember it. So you practiced it so many times that your body knows better than your brain. Now, 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old are those set of memorized subconscious automatic programs. So by 35, we pretty much figured it all out neurologically, become hardwired. So now the person wants to think positively, but they've been feeling negatively for the last, 25 years. They want to create a new life and, create a new vision for themselves, but they feel guilty. That's mind and body working in opposition. We have to recondition the body to a new mind. And when the body becomes the mind, then when I said to change is to think greater than the body, what I mean by that is we have to think greater than the memorized emotions that the body has recognized or become familiar with. Well, stress is when the body's knocked out of balance. And when you're being chased by a lion, thousands of years ago, you turned on a primitive nervous system to mobilize all of this energy to prepare you for some threat or event in your external environment. And when you mobilize all that energy, you're really saying, I got to take care of this body, I got to become aware of my environment, and how much time do I have to get there? So what was once highly adaptive, which means if you're being chased by a lion, you better make sure that you have enough energy to either fight or run. But now if you're thinking about, firing an employee, and you know that this person has a wife that's sick, and they have 4 children, and you know that they actually need the job more than the other person is going to stay, and you begin to think about that over and over again, you're turning on the stress response just by thought alone. And what was once highly adaptive now becomes very maladaptive, because no organism in nature can survive under long-term stress.
Long-term stress, yeah.
Well, what it is that there's nothing wrong with having emotional reactions to things in your life. That's pretty much part of life. It's the repetition of those that keep the body out of balance. Now, your body is your unconscious mind. It does not know the difference between a stressor in your environment that produces a reaction and the thoughts that you think, that produce the same physiological response. To the body, it thinks it's in the same experience over and over again. And so if you keep mobilizing all of this energy for some threat that's real or imagined, there's no energy then for internal repair. There's no energy for growth and repair. And so if 2 cancer cells get together and they want to start a family or community, all of the troops are fighting a war in the external environment. There's no energy for growth and repair in the internal environment. And whether it's heart disease, whether it's immune-mediated conditions, whether it's muscle pain, whether it's digestive disturbances, whether it's memory problems, infertility, it's all created by those hormones of stress, because as the body is living in that emergency mode, there's no real need for long-term building projects. Exactly, and if you think about it just in terms of the amount of energy that we have available, it's an interesting phenomenon, because those chemicals of stress are highly addictive. They give us a rush of energy. We begin to associate the problems and the conditions in our life with feeling alive. So we begin to subconsciously keep the problems, the bad relationships, the bad jobs, in our external world to reaffirm our emotional addiction, so we can remember who we are as a somebody. So here's an example where you see a lion. You're going to turn on the fight or flight nervous system. But you could see your mother-in-law and you could have the same reaction. Or you could begin to auto-suggest and think about the problems in your life. And in all 3 cases, you're turning on that sympathetic nervous system. And as you turn on this primitive nervous system, you have to mobilize energy to prepare you for some threat so that your body can adapt to those conditions. So signal travels down to the adrenal glands through the spinal cord. The adrenal glands squirt out a bunch of adrenaline and adrenal hormones, and you get this rush of energy. You become super aware for a few moments. Your pupils dilate. Your salivary juices begin to shut down. As a result, your heart rate and your respiratory rate begin to increase, because you're either going to fight or you're going to run, and blood is sent to your extremities, and that's called the fight or flight response. Now, the difficulty with this is that in the long term, there's no energy for you to do anything else. Let's say, as an example, that you have been caught in this cycle of thinking and feeling and thinking like a victim or suffering, because you had an experience 20 years ago. And after that experience, you have an event in your life that produces an emotional reaction. Now, what most people don't know is that when you have an emotional reaction, there's a refractory period of chemicals that are created that are connected to that experience. As a matter of fact, feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences. So if people don't know how to control their emotional reactions, and they allow that refractory period to run for hours or days, that's called a mood. So what's wrong with you? Well, I'm in a mood. Well, why are you in a mood? Well, this thing happened to me 5 days ago, and I'm memorizing my emotional reaction. Now, if you keep that same refractory period going for weeks or months, that's called a temperament. So you say, why is he so angry? And you say, why are you so angry? He says, well, this thing happened to me 11 months ago. Same refractory period that's going on and on. Now, if you keep it going for years on end, that's called a personality trait. So by very definition, our personality is completely connected to our past. And if we live by the same emotions every single day, and those emotions are driving our thoughts, we're literally thinking in the past. And every time we recall that event from the past, we produce the same chemistry in the brain and the body as if the event was happening. Now, if you keep circulating the same chemicals, you're going to condition your body to memorize that emotion better than your conscious mind. Now, let's suppose the person has a moment of illumination and they say, oh my gosh, today I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to make excuses, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself, I'm not going to live by this emotional state. They're going to have to break that chemical continuity that's become so familiar to them. They're going to stop firing the same thoughts in their brain that are hardwired, and they're going to stop sending the same emotional chemicals to their body that they've memorized.
So, but then it's more than just changing it in your mind. You're combating a physical, chemical, body, cellular memory reaction.
Exactly. And the moment you interrupt that chemical continuity, the body, which has become the mind, begins to send signals back to the brain. So you started out with really good intentions, and all of a sudden 2 hours go by, and all of a sudden, you know, the cells of the body get together and say, hey, we've modified our receptor sites to receive more chemicals of guilt. And all of a sudden you're going to stop after 20 years of this? So the body sends a signal back up the central nervous system. I call that the fast track. At the same time, chemical levels, those peptides that we produce that are feelings, begin to drop because you're no longer feeling suffering. And all of a sudden, the thermostat in the brain, called the hypothalamus, notices that circulating levels of suffering is going down. So it sends a signal back to the thinking brain that's called the slow track. The next thing you know, you start to hear these sub-vocalizations in your head. That chatter, you know, that awfulizing that starts saying like, you know, maybe you should start tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a better day. Or, ooh, well, this doesn't feel right. We can't have this. And so the body, when I say to change is be greater than the body, I literally mean that you have to overcome the chatter and the voices in your head, because the moment you respond to that voice as if it's true, consciousness immerses itself back into the program, and we return back to the same personality, thinking the same thoughts, performing the same actions, living by the same emotions, and really expecting something different to happen in our life.